Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into the intense, honestly almost unbelievable life of a man who literally redrew the map of the United States. We're talking about James K. Polk. Sandwiched right there between Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, he kind of gets completely overlooked. But as we're going to see in just 4 short years, this guy fundamentally altered the destiny of the entire nation.
So let's kick things off with the exact question the rival Whig party actually jeered during the 1844 election. Who is James K. Polk? See, the Democrats had just bypassed absolute political heavyweights, guys like Martin Van Buren and John C. Calhoun. Instead, on the 9th ballot, they nominated this relatively unknown former congressman and governor from Tennessee. He was literally the first dark horse presidential candidate in U.S. history. The Whigs, well, they were pretty smug about it, totally convinced their star candidate Henry Clay would absolutely crush him.
And man, his political opponents were incredibly dismissive of his stiff, super methodical personality. Even former President John Quincy Adams wrote this scathing assessment of him, basically saying he had no wit, no gracefulness, nothing that makes an orator. But, and this is absolutely crucial, Adams completely underestimated the sheer unstoppable power of Polk's relentless labor. People looked at Polk, saw someone small in stature with a pretty drab temperament, and totally missed the fact that he harbored an unshakable conviction that he was a man of destiny.
But to really understand this president, who literally outworked everyone else in Washington, we've got to go back. We have to look at the boy and the absolutely agonizing crucible that built his character.
As a kid, Polk suffered from incredibly poor health. When he was 17, the pain got so bad that his father sent him in a covered wagon to undergo major surgery. Now, keep in mind, there was no anesthesia back then. Polk was completely awake during this visceral, excruciating procedure to remove urinary stones. Just imagine that. Surviving that unimaginable ordeal instilled in him a legendary level of courage, grit, and this unyielding iron will that would absolutely define his entire political career.
That rigid self-discipline, it was a direct product of his environment too. His mother's strict Presbyterianism gave him a moral rigidity that governed, well, pretty much everything he did. Politically, he soaked up the Jeffersonian values from his grandfather, the firm belief that government should serve the people, not just the wealthy elite. And by the time he got to the University of North Carolina, he deliberately majored in math and the classics. Why? Specifically to quote-unquote discipline his mind, relentlessly honing his arguments in the debate club. Okay, so let's fast forward and move to the White House. Let's see how all of this intense background morphed into an obsessive, micromanaging work ethic that honestly bordered on self-destruction. Once he was in power, Polk flat out refused to delegate. He was a notorious micromanager who routinely worked crushing 12-hour days. In his incredibly detailed 25-volume presidential diary, he noted that he'd never labored more constantly or intensely, truly believing he was the hardest working man in the country. He saw the presidency as absolutely no bed of roses, and he was determined to direct and monitor every single little detail of his government.
He was so fiercely focused on his agenda that he filled those diaries with actual scorn for anything he viewed as a distraction. He complained constantly about politicians engaging in what he called the contemptible business of seeking office. Actually, my favorite example is from an 1846 diary entry, where a juggler performed at the White House. Polk was there, but dryly wrote down that while the crowd was filled with wonder, he, the president, thought the time was unprofitably spent. The man literally had no time for magic.
Because he trusted almost no one else and much preferred the isolation of his office over any ceremonial public events, his wife Sarah stepped up to become his closest political advisor. She was his absolute, indispensable private partner. Sarah managed the select social circles he totally ignored. She helped him draft speeches, copied his correspondence, and was constantly warning him against overworking himself. He would actually hand her newspapers and ask her to read them for him, just so he could keep his focus completely locked on policy.
So, what was all that obsessive work actually for? Well, early on in his administration, Polk sat down with his Secretary of the Navy and shared a highly ambitious 4-point checklist for his presidency. Now, setting massive goals is one thing, right? But actually achieving all of them in a single term, that is what makes his administration historically staggering. The 4 targets were crystal clear: secure the Oregon boundary, lower tariffs for his agrarian base, restructure the national treasury away from private banks, and boldly acquire California to stretch the nation from ocean to ocean. And Polk executed this plan with ruthless efficiency. For Oregon, he used that aggressive slogan, 54-degree, 40-minute, or fight, basically staring the British down before practically settling at the 49th parallel. Domestically, he directly pressured Congress to push through the Walker Tariff Act and establish the independent treasury. And finally, when Mexico repulsed his offers to purchase California, he didn't hesitate to use armed conflict to seize the territory and fulfill manifest destiny. 4 colossal goals set, 4 colossal goals achieved.
I want to let this number sink in for a second. 1.2 million. That is the staggering amount of square miles Polk added to the United States. To put that into perspective, if you live in California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, or the Pacific Northwest today, you are living on a map drawn by James K. Polk. In less than 4 years, he added more territory to the Union than any other president except Thomas Jefferson. And of course, the value of that land skyrocketed almost immediately with the California gold rush, permanently altering the wealth of the entire nation.
But as you might expect, this massive expansion came at a really heavy political and moral cost, creating a fascinating split in how he's remembered today.
We see a really stark contrast here between his contemporaries and modern historians. Back in the 19th century, critics like a young Abraham Lincoln actually championed a censure against Polk for starting the Mexican War, and Ulysses S. Grant famously called it the most unjust war ever waged. On the flip side, modern presidential historians look at his unparalleled legislative success, hitting 4 out of 4 major goals, and consistently rank him quite highly, usually 12th to 14th, as a near-great president for his sheer effectiveness. It's a striking divide.
As we reach the end of his story, we have to look at the tragic final sprint of his life. Polk pledged to serve only a single term, and true to form, he actually kept that promise. He rejoiced in handing over the presidency in March of 1849. But his retirement? It was brutally short. While touring the South on his way home, his constitution, which was just completely shattered by 4 years of unremitting toil, finally gave out. He passed away in Nashville a mere 3 months after leaving office.
It really leaves us with a profound question. Did the hardest working man in the country literally trade his life for manifest destiny? He set out to transform the map of a continent, and he accomplished exactly what he promised. But that unyielding iron will that made it all possible seems to have ultimately destroyed him. Thanks for joining me for this explainer on the relentless force that was James K. Polk. Until next time, keep questioning the history behind the map.